Hello and welcome to today's session. Today I'll be showing the WUSTL REDCap e-consent template and adjoining SOP. For those of you who don't know, I'm Chris Sortson. I'm from Becker Medical Library, and feel free to email me with any questions about this template or SOP moving forward. I will also add throughout the session, if you have questions, feel free to type them in the chat or unmute yourself. When you're not asking a question, please keep yourself on mute. If you put a question in the chat, I'll either answer it as soon as I see it or whenever there's a natural break in the session. But feel free to put those in as we go. Okay, so first I'd like to acknowledge members of the e-consent working group who contributed to the template. I do this both to thank these folks and to give you an idea of the number of stakeholders and regulatory groups who provided guidance and helped test this resource. So this was not just me going to my REDCap silo and deciding how this should work. We worked together, we had plenty of guidance. And if you look at the bolded section here, you'll see the groups represented: OVCR, IRB, OGC, Center for Clinical Studies, MHRC, HRQA, informatics. So we've got all the we've got contributions from the people, the people that we need to see this. So thanks to them. I'd also want to specifically recognize and thank Caitlin Moore, who's a clinical research specialist in cardiology. She did a lot of the work in the very early days of virtual research with information security and even the developers of REDCap at Vanderbilt that really laid the blueprint for the features necessary for this template. So without Caitlin's contributions, I don't know if we'd be this far yet. So thanks to everyone on this slide, specifically Caitlin. So what we'll cover today is a general overview of the template and SOP, which will include some disclaimers, and then we will move on to create a project in REDCap from the template. And then most of the session will just be going through sections of the SOP that comes with the template to just set everything up all the way through to testing this process. And I'm just going to kind of go through section by section that you will come across when you are using the SOP. Okay, so we'll start with a few notes that are maybe not as fun, but some important things to cover. So first of all, please consult with the IRB to confirm your project is appropriate for e-consent before going through the process to create one. There's a link to information about free 1-hour consultations with the IRB at the top of the SOP that we'll go to in just a minute. And I encourage you to take advantage of that if you're unsure if your project would qualify for or would be appropriate for e-consent. The template and SOP are specific to creating an e-consent project and process. Okay, so I'll talk more about the goal of these two documents in a minute, but if you're going to do anything beyond consenting participants in REDCap, such as sending participants survey, entering lab data, things like that, at least one of your study team member needs to have REDCap experience or go through REDCap training. So the template standard operating procedures does not serve as training materials for REDCap. It is specific to the e-consent process. I'd also like to add that the e-consent does not replace or eliminate the consent conversation with participants. Okay, so it's an e-consent, not an a-consent, meaning absent or automated consent. If you had a conversation with participants when doing in-person consent, you are still required to do so here. So you'd set up a meeting and then engage with that participant either via phone or Zoom, just as you would if a participant came to your lab or your clinic. And I'll also mention that e-consent doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be virtual. It doesn't mean you have to be at a distance. You can use e-consent even if participants are still coming in person. You can use a tablet or a laptop or whatever is convenient. But if you are doing it at a distance, you are still required to have that consent conversation. And the last two bullets kind of go together, that this this template's not going to cover all projects, and it's certainly not a guarantee if you use it that you'll automatically be approved by the IRB. There'll still be a review process, and there may be some adaptations needed from the template. So the goals of this, and when I say template, I'm meaning template and SOP combination. So the goal of this template is that someone with minimal REDCap experience can use these two to go from project creation to a fully functional e-consent project ready for IRB review. IRB review underlined and italicized there, just remembering again that going through this doesn't mean you're ready to consent participants. You're ready to have it reviewed by the IRB. And then, so how I think about it is the goal is that most studies would require minimal consultation for setting this up to enroll adult participants. I don't have any strict guidelines around minimal consultation, but hopefully with just a few emails and maybe a Zoom consultation, we can get this up and running for most studies. Some projects will require more moderate levels of consultation, so additional emails, maybe a couple of Zoom sessions to look at your study, and then some projects will require more extensive consultation, which could be more meetings, but also maybe pulling in people from regulatory groups with myself and talking through how this would work. And I don't think that's dissimilar from a normal consent process, where there's a lot of them are straightforward, and then there's some that have nuances that make them more difficult. But really, I say all this with the goal of just the understanding that there's going to be probably little details of each study that require a little bit of manipulation here or there on this. But the goal is that you can pick this up, you can go from nothing to an actual functional e-consent project, even with minimal experience, and you can get a feel for what an e-consent process would look like, and then submit it to the IRB for review. So some specifications and features of this. So right now, so the top bullet is that this is for projects requiring a full consent process, which may go without saying, but if you have some waiver of consent, there's not, if your project has a waiver of consent, that this goes beyond the scope of what you would need. So this is for projects requiring a full consent process. And as it's set up right now, it's for adult consent, and it's a single signature only. And I have in parentheses here, at this point, I had I'd say probably the biggest group of people who signed up was from pediatrics. And so I'll touch on that later, but this can be adapted for the pediatric studies. And as I'll mention in a few slides, we are going to be coming out with some templates for pediatric consents. Some of the big features of this consent or this template is that when we create it, you have 4 pre-built instruments that can be adapted for your specific survey. The survey login feature is automatically turned on with specifications that I'll go over. There's a consent documentation data collection instrument built in so that you can document your consent conversation and the entire consent process for quality assurance purposes. And this bullet, participant responses to the survey cannot be edited after submitted. If you've worked on an e-consent and REDCap before, you know that After the participant signs, a study team member then has to go in and sign. And there was originally some concern about accidentally changing one of the responses from the participant, but this template has settings embedded in it that eliminate that risk. And then the final bullet is that there's automated delivery of fully executed consent form signed by both participant and study member via a PIN protected link. And this was a real sticking point as we were developing this. So we are very excited that it has this feature. A few things looking ahead. So starting next Wednesday, I'm just going to have a standing Zoom office hours for eConsent from 2 to 4. And I'm going to send a link to that session to everyone who registered for this session. So this coming Wednesday, it will be exclusively for all of you. Moving forward, once we decide what the best way to post that Zoom link is, that will be open to the university. There's another session coming up on March 9th that will be this same session. So if anything goes wrong today, internet connection, anything else, we have another one scheduled on the books already. And then, as I mentioned, we're going to have additional consent or additional templates coming out, specifically a template that goes through how to modify your eConsent. And then, as I mentioned again, pediatric templates and SOPs will be coming. And then some other things that there's going to be additional resources, but I'm not going to include them right now. But keep your eyes open for research news announcements related to REDCap eConsent. Okay, what I'm going to do now is switch over to my internet browser, and I'll also allow time for questions if anybody has any. Okay, so where I'm going to start here is at the mHealth research core, or mhealth.wustl.edu. The reason is this is where the SOP lives. So if you go to this webpage, go to navigation tools, and then REDCap eConsent. And if you also go into a search engine and you type MHRC WUSTL eConsent, this page will come up, or something similar to that. But this is a really nice eConsent navigation tool from the mHealth Research Core. And we thought the SOP and instructions for this would really fit nicely here. So if you scroll down about halfway down the page, we have the SOP. And what I'm going to do, so under here, WUSTL eConsent template, what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on the SOP, and I'm going to open this link in a new tab. And then I'm going to right click on REDCap version 10 and open that in a new tab. So I've got my SOP folder and REDCap open on separate tabs. If you didn't get to this page immediately, it's okay. You actually don't need to have the SOP open for everything going forward, because you can just follow along with me. So I'm going to go into Box. I'm actually already logged in. If you're not logged into Box, you'll have to enter your I believe I'm already logged in. There we go. Okay. So within this folder, we have two documents. So the SOP, which I've mentioned over and over here, and then also we have instructions on how to send this eConsent survey to the IRB for review. Okay, so after you get done with everything here, you can use these to send your survey to the IRB for review. I'll go ahead and open this. So here's the preview in Box, and then I'm actually going to bring up, I've already opened the other file just for time purposes here. But just at the top, you can see my contact information. We have the link for the consultation with IRB, and then there's some links to some additional training materials. Just a few words about the SOP. So number one, it's 19 pages. It's kind of long. A lot of it is screenshots. So just to scroll down. So this is there's actually some bigger screenshots. So hopefully it's actually not 19, it's a little shorter than it seems from a text standpoint. And so it goes through pretty much step by step to get all the way through to testing and actually enrolling participants. What I'm going to do is just go through each section. So here you've got the settings check, then we'll set up the actual instruments, and then we'll go through and actually test the e-consent project. And I've gotten a couple questions sent to me, and I'll say, so let me answer this first one. Will the e-consent project be separate from data collection project for the study? I would say in most circumstances, I would keep the two together, having the e-consent and the actual data collection. There could be extenuating circumstances where it made sense to have two separate, like a consent project and then where you collect the actual data for a REDCap project. But you'd want to document that there's two separate. But I can't think of a situation right off the top of my head. And then I got another question that someone was having issues with using a Mac. As far as how this would, in the specific REDCap e-consent, how it would be different on a Mac, I don't know. I haven't heard anything. I know I've had some Mac users test it, but I have not heard any feedback that that this would behave differently on a Mac versus okay. So we're getting some others that saying it is not different. So some other software, maybe if you've used other e-consent software, you might have issues on Mac versus PC or anything else. But I don't think this should behave differently. And from the others, from other people in the group, I'm hearing that is the case. Okay. I'm going to switch back to my web browser, and I'll then go to REDCap. And here in REDCap, we're going to go to REDCap version 10. And we'll just create a new project. And when we get to the new project, we'll just go ahead and give it a title. I'm just going to call mine e-consent template with today's date. And I'm going to go ahead and select research. You could also select practice just for fun today, but I'm just going to select research. So there's a lot of information to input here. When you're just getting up and started, and especially if because you probably won't have your IRB approval yet, since you are part of your approval will be this e-consent, unless you're adding e-consent to an existing project, I should say. But you may not have this right at first. So the minimum you need to do when you're first getting started is to just specify one area of research. That's what will allow you to go in. And when we create this project, it will be in development mode. And before you move to what's called production mode, which is outlined in the SOP, you'll have to upload an IRB approval waiver letter. So for today, when we're just starting this up and we're working in development mode, just have to specify one area of research. And then we'll scroll down to the bottom of the page. And here where start project from scratch or begin with template, we will choose a template. And then scroll all the way to the bottom of our templates here, and we have the WUSTL REDCap academic e-consent template. One word about the terminology REDCap academic, if you've never heard that. Basically, there's another software called the REDCap Cloud that's used for primarily Part 11 studies. And so in our working group, we often distinguish this REDCap from the REDCap Cloud by calling it REDCap Academic. So if you're not familiar with that term, you can just imagine it's not even there. You can just say WUSTL REDCap eConsent template. It just refers to this instance of REDCap. Also go over here to the description. And if you come to this template from REDCap, you can easily get to the SOP by clicking Show More here. And then you can copy and paste this URL into your web browser and get to the SOP. Unfortunately, we couldn't hyperlink this in the description, so you can't just click, you've got to copy and paste it. But once you've selected this, I'm going to go ahead and say Create Project. And then I've got a question. Will you talk about eConsent to an existing REDCap project, please and thank you? I'll mention it as we go through the settings. I would say if you're doing that, reach out to me if you have questions after today, because there are some pitfalls depending on how you bring that in. There could be instances where the settings don't all get transferred over. So I'll mention that as we go through. I would say the first step is setting it up, this as it is, and then determining what the best way to incorporate it into your current project. But those are good questions. And so everybody should be here. If you're following along, if you're working through this, you should be on this project setup page. And I'm just going to bring up the eConsent or the SOP real quick. And I'm not going to do this the whole session, but just to give you an idea here, this first page is basically creating the project. So it's what we just did. And then it's has a bullet about development mode versus production mode. And then, then we get into settings check. Okay, so just to give you an idea of how that works. So it's super long. It's long, but this whole page was just for the project setup. So it's pretty detailed, and maybe you get through a lot of it takes a lot of words to cover something like creating a project. Okay, so the first thing we do is go through and we check some settings. So when I call out these settings, these are the settings that would be changed from what they would be if you created a project without a template. So just to point out a simple one here, surveys are activated in this project. If you created a project from scratch, they would not be activated. Scrolling down the page, there is an email field designated for communications, and it should be this consent copy email. And that's really the only two things on this first page that are different from starting from scratch. So we'll then go into the online designer. And when you get here, you should have 4 data collection instruments already there. 2 of them should have surveys enabled, surveys enabled with the survey settings here. And then one has the little, red circle here around automated invitations. And so now we're just going to walk through and check some more settings. The first one is the survey login setting. And again, I'm going to do my best to go in the exact order that you will come across these in the SOP when you're working through this on your own. So if I bring up the survey settings, so this is enabled, and there's already a field designated for the PIN. So keep this variable name in mind, the participant PIN, and enter a numeric PIN. And you may see a different amount of text here depending on the browser you're in and the size of your screen. But it should be this participant pin. The minimum number of fields above that are required for login should be set to 1. I will say, we have this set up for a pin. If you wanted to do a pin and a username or something like that, you could certainly add, making it more secure is not going to be, it's something that the IRB is going to, making it less secure, the IRB wouldn't like, but if you make it more secure, I don't think there'll be any issues there. But you just would have to think about your participants if they would like to have more things to log into. But just pointing that out, just to say that we have these things set up, but there are times that there may need to be minor adaptations. And then this is set to all surveys. And then we have some text in here that we developed with guidance from information security, guidance feedback from information security, basically saying that if they fail to log in 5 times, they'll be required to wait 15 minutes. And if you scroll down, there's actually a section here where you can then enter email contact information for study team. So you could just put your email in here. I'll just say, we'll just give a generic one. Same here. Just so when we get into the actual testing of the project, we have something besides bracketed email and phone number here. And if you wanted to add a specific person's name here, you can do that as well. And then these should be set to 5 and 15. And again, we go back up to our wording here. The person gets 5 attempts, and if they fail 5 times, they get locked out for 15 minutes. I'll go ahead and save that. And we'll close. Okay, next thing we will check is our survey settings for our informed consent form. Go ahead and select survey settings here. Now, again, there's a lot of settings here, but I'll just touch on the ones that should be adjusted or should be changed from what the default settings are. So for example, we have some text built in here that we created with guidance from the IRB, and this will be at the top of the consent survey when somebody opens their consent survey. And I'll also add that if this needs to be modified for your study, the IRB will see this when you submit to them for review. So if you make modifications, that will all get reviewed prior to using it to enroll real participants. Next, I'm going to scroll down to the survey customizations section. The only 2 things that are changed here, number 1 is question display format is set to 1 section per page. And when we get to testing, this will make sense. This is basically so that when somebody opens a consent survey, they don't have to scroll all the way through on a single page. They'll read a little bit, they'll click next and continue on through that. And then this is an important one here, save a PDF of completed survey responses to a file upload field. We have that set to the signed _ consent form variable. This is actually what we will use to deliver the fully executed consent to the participant. So we will not use REDCap's built-in feature for that. We are creating our own way to deliver that consent document. Fully executed consent document, I should say. I'm going to scroll down to survey access, and allow, save, and return later option should be set to yes, and then this should be unchecked. And I'll also say that during testing, there were times that Some of these would be set for some people and not for others. So this is all outlined in the SOP. So if you came here and this was set to no, which is the default setting, if you created a project from scratch, just switch it over. And then scrolling down to, excuse me, forgot here. So again, we have, this is the thank you screen that someone will see, the text on the thank you screen that someone will see when they, after they complete the survey. So, again, anytime you see this bracket with email, phone number, or person's name, you can just replace that with your study specific information of how somebody can contact you. And then we'll scroll down to this e-consent framework and PDF auto archiver. What I just mentioned a minute ago, where some settings were automatically set for some people and not for others, this was the section that happened most frequently. So your screen should look like mine, and I'll just go through these. If it doesn't, just go ahead and modify it so it does. So you should have auto archiver plus e-consent framework selected. The allow e-consent responses to be edited by user should be checked. And then here in first name and last name field, we should have participant first name, participant last name. We don't have anything here. And then here for the signature field, we have participant signature. And we'll go ahead and save those changes. Okay. Got a couple questions here. I'll just go through here. If a patient were to withdraw from a study, is there a way to denote in this template? So if you were looking at a database, you could see those who withdrew versus those who remained in the study. That's not built into this template. That would be, there's ways you could do that to indicate a withdrawal, but not within this template. Feel free to reach out to me directly if you'd like to discuss that for your study. And then if we update settings on an already approved e-consent, do we need to submit to the IRB for approval? So I would say ask the IRB. The reason it's not a definitive yes is because, so if you made a change to your consent document, absolutely. If you made a change to this automated invitation, it's difficult for me to say, 100% that every setting in here needs to get anything. And I'll also say that there are people from IRB and from the Human Research Quality Assurance Program on if you have anything to add. But if you change any of the text, definitely if you change anything that the participant will see, you should absolutely do that. If you change anything to the delivery message, you should absolutely, or how the delivery is done, you definitely need to have that approved. If you changed like the font of the survey text, I'm not sure if that needs to go through approval. I would recommend that if you aren't sure about anything, go to the IRB, the SWOT page where you can chat with them and just let them know what you're doing and see if it requires a modification. Okay, so now we're going to go through the survey settings for this fully executed consent form. Okay, and if you're not seeing the chat, Andrea from the Human Research Quality Assurance Program just stated that she agrees. And I would just add, if you're ever unsure, just reach out to them. Always better to be safe on that. Okay, a few things here. Again, we have some specific text. This instrument is what's going to be used to deliver the fully executed consent forms, as the name might imply here, fully executed consent forms. And I'll also say if some of this isn't fully making sense, hopefully we tie up any loose ends when we actually go through the testing of this project. But this is what a participant will see when they open this survey, where they can access their fully executed consent. Scrolling down the page, we again have this one section per page. It's not as crucial for this survey as the other, and you'll see why when we actually go through it. And then this is disabled here. So this save a PDF to completed survey responses, that was enabled on the other survey setting, but not on this. So be sure you're looking at the survey settings for the correct survey when you're going through the SOP. Scrolling down, again, we have save and return later option for respondents set to yes. And this time we're going to allow the respondents to return and modify completed responses, which may seem a little scary, like why would we let somebody do that? They actually can't modify anything on this survey, but what they can do is get back to it and download a copy of their fully executed consent at any time. That's why this is there. Again, hopefully that will be more clear when we test. And again, some text here. All this text, I should mention, all this text is in the SOP, so you can check it against the SOP to see if there's anything different in these areas where there's text provided. And then e-consent framework, we actually have that disabled for this survey. And I'll go ahead and save changes here. Actually, you could click cancel if you wanted save changes or cancel, because we didn't change anything, so either of those would work. All right, the next setting we're going to check is the automated survey invitation for the fully executed consent form. Again, so most of this should already be included in here. The first thing, you have the option to say who this email will be from. This is the email that will have a link to the fully executed consent forms. So you could put your own name here, or you could put a lab name, study name if that's appropriate. Obviously, for certain populations, you wouldn't want to put any sort of study name on it if it's a vulnerable population. But you can put something in here that you want, who you want the participant to see that email being delivered from. And then over here in this drop-down menu, you may have my email address there. That's just because I'm the one who created the template that got uploaded. Just click the drop-down, find your email, or if you were, you had another study team member that you want this to come from, and you had already added them to the project, you'd be able to select their email here. I'm actually going to change this, and I'm going to make this a little more obvious. This isn't something you would use for your study, but just so I'm going to have several emails coming to my inbox as I demonstrate this, and so I'm going to just make these obvious as to what they are. So I'm going to say this is from completed consents. Again, not something you would use if you were doing this in real life, but for our purposes today, I think this will help. The subject should be signed informed consent form for your records. And then the text should already be in here. And again, this text was, the IRB provided guidance and feedback for this text. So there's things like, a lot of times it'll say informed consent rather than survey. A lot of times the pre-built or the default text in REDCap says survey, and we just change this to informed consent form. Moving to the upper right, we should have specify when conditions for sending. You should have this first box selected, and informed consent form should be selected in the drop-down menu. If it's not, just go ahead and select that. And then we get to this when the following logic becomes true. So go ahead and click in here. Now, if you aren't somebody who does any computer programming or work with any syntax, you don't necessarily need to have a great understanding of this. You just really need to look at the SOP and check that it matches exactly what the SOP says. And even though you don't need to fully understand what this is saying, I'm going to go ahead and tell you kind of in human readable or human understandable, as opposed to machine language, machine understandable language like what this is, just to give you an overview. So this first statement here, where this consent copy distribution equals 1, it's basically saying that the participant has indicated that they would like to receive the fully executed consent via email. And so we'll get to a field later where that will be apparent. And then all the rest of this is basically saying that this fully executed consent form will not be sent until all signatures, all names, all dates, here we have our study team signatures, are completed on the consent survey. Okay, so it's basically saying the participant has to agree to receive the fully executed consent via email, and all the signatures and everything else need to be filled out on the actual consent survey before this automated survey invitation will be triggered. I'm going to go ahead and update and close the editor. And then moving down, we have, this is set to send immediately. If there were some reason that you wanted like a slight delay, you could set that, but it's set that as soon as this is done, the consent survey is done, the study team member has gone in, completed this, it's just going to shoot out an email to the participant with this, assuming the participant said that they want to receive the fully executed consent via email. And then, very important step for this automated survey invitation is that it always starts as not active, so we have to activate it. So go ahead and switch that to active. And here you will need to click save because we did change that active setting. Okay, I've got a question here. Okay, so in the early days of e-consent, there was a discussion about not saying consent in the subject line. Is that okay now, or maybe a better way to ask, what are we allowed to say in the from subject line and body, thinking about HIPAA? So for this, so what I can say is we, as I mentioned, this was done with guidance from the IRB. One thing here is that this will be a PIN protected link. So this won't be delivered as an attachment to the email. And then it could be that for certain populations, that will not be appropriate and you'll need to edit it. And that is something that will, that can be tested, that will need to be approved by the IRB. So if you are a study that says you can't put consent in the subject line, the IRB should indicate that with you when you go for review, and you can make modifications based on their feedback. Okay, so somebody else said in the early days they were told they could not send a completed consent via REDCap or via REDCap, even by adding the secure feature on the subject line, because REDCap is not supporting that feature. Again, so what, I guess what I can say is we've, yes, Andrea, what Andrea said. Yep. IRB, you know, we have monthly meetings that they've seen kind of the step-by-step process of this. And the secure, you know, my understanding of not using the secure and the you know, one of the reasons people weren't using the secure feature was because of how complicated it was for the participants. I don't know, I could be wrong in this, but yes, what you'll see is that this can only be accessed by a PIN. So this is a PIN protected link, which changes some of that, what was going on in the very, okay, so I'll let you, so if you look at the top 2 comments above you, it's from Andrea and Susan, who are from the HRQA. So, yeah, so, you know, you could talk it out with the regulatory groups, but all I know is I've spent many hours discussing these things with this group. So,
Chris, do you want me to just jump in real quick?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So when we put together this Part 11 e-consent task force, we purposely had individuals from across the institution, such as the HIPAA office, the IRB, the OVCR's office, our general counsel, everyone involved in creating this template in a way that's supposed to minimize burden and allow us to do it. And so the PEN feature is what was agreed upon as a secure way to be able to send a consent form. It's PIN accessible so that it's, you know, kind of under lock and key, so to speak. So if it accidentally went to the wrong person, that person wouldn't be able to open up that consent form because they wouldn't have that PIN number. So it's an added security feature, but just rest assured, like this entire process has gone through, you know, we approaching on 2 years almost of review and vetting by all of the people across the institution.
Thanks, Andrea. Yeah, absolutely. And again, you know, the additional safety net is that, you know, you'll go through this and then you will, and then, you know, as I mentioned earlier, you know, after you complete this, go through the SOP, you know, the next step is not to enroll a participant, it's to then have it reviewed by the IRB. So, you know, for specific populations, you know, specifically vulnerable populations, rare conditions, things like that, you know, some of these things may be need to ratchet it up, but you know, as Andrea said, you know, this has been vetted by all the right groups. Okay, so we've got, please feel free to keep asking those questions because, you know, I know many of you have been working on these over the years, or excuse me, over the, you know, last year and a half, 2 years. And if you've been told something along the way, it's great to get it clarified right now or in a follow-up conversation. All right, the next step after the automated survey invitation, and again, I am going, so I am going to now go into the instruments, and we had 2 people ask about adapting an already approved consent to this template. What I would say is, you know, you wouldn't need to adapt anything with your survey, with what I'm about to show you here in the consent survey, because you're not changing any of the language. I would be careful with just trying to kind of like, whatever the right word is, kind of shove in this this template and functionality into a existing one, because that actually might be more work than needed. Based on how your current one is set up, there could just be like a few settings that need to be changed. So again, I'm going to send out an email after this session with a link to a 2-hour whatever you call a open or office hours in a virtual world. But feel free to come back with some specific questions regarding your specific project. But it's kind of a project by project basis if you have something going right now, how to best implement these settings. So feel free to reach out to me. Elena asked, and this is something I'll get into here in just a minute, about having the participants choose their PIN or giving the participants a PIN. That is not outlined in the SOP. As it is right now, you have that choice whether to give them one or they choose one. The main thing that InfoSec told us is to put a message that PIN should not be things like 1, 2, 3, 4. As far as using their birthday or something like that, I would defer to people from the regulatory groups as to whether that, I was going to say, to me, if it's a birthday or something kind of obvious, it's kind of the, don't set your password to password, or don't set your password to like your first name or something. I would make it more discreet for that. Sun Young, I'm going to go over that in just a moment. And we've got, the PIN is going to be set in one of these instruments. And so I think what I'll do moving forward here, great questions coming in. I think after each section, I'll just take a moment to go back through the questions, okay? Because many of these I will get to. So the next step in the SOP is to actually go into the informed consent survey here. Now, before I click into that, let me just say, when you go to update this, you should be at a point, if you're doing this for a real study, you should be at a point where you have gone through the My IRB application and received a .rtf consent template. So let me just bring up what I'm talking about. That you might not know immediately, but once you see it, you'll know. So just quickly, everyone seeing a Word document with a consent form? Somebody could let me know yes or no on that. Or are you still seeing my REDCap?
We see it.
Okay, great. So this is what we're going to build into the consent survey. I'll go through some of this, but there's really no point to go in and make a lot of effort at the wording of this until you've gone through the My IRB application, and it may even be worth waiting until you get that first round of feedback from the IRB before you start typing in this consent, because ultimately you need to make your consent survey match word for word what is on this. So, if you start working on it before you submit and get one round of feedback, if there's major changes, you're going to have to go back in, you're going to have to make them on this form, and then you're going to have to go in and make them on your consent. So for just from practical purposes, a good point to start on that is, after you've gotten that form, and even maybe one step further after you've gotten some feedback from the IRB on your consent form. So let's go ahead and open this survey now. And so when that form that I just showed you gets generated from the IRB applications, from the My IRB application, you get some template language. We've tried to avoid having template language in this as much as possible, other than some things that probably won't change, such as information here regarding the IRB stamp, and then project title, principal investigator, research team contact. So what's in here rather than template language is a lot of additional instruction on how to set this up, okay? Until you get to the bottom of the page where you have the signature fields, okay? So there we have some actual fields that most likely will not change before you submit to the IRB. Everything else above here will most likely be modified. And I say most likely. It actually has to be modified because it has this. You'll see some red italicized text, and this is instructional text, and it even has the instruction of delete this before you send to the IRB, and then it has the instructions here. So I'll walk through this, and we will modify this a little bit. We won't do the full. We won't enter the full text for the consent form that I sent out, but I want to make a couple points before we start working on this. So this field right here is the IRB stamp field. So if I bring back up my form, I've got this generic IRB stamp that comes when I first get my form from the MyRB application system. What will happen is, just as you do for an in-person consent, you'll tailor this to your study, you'll submit it to the IRB, then you'll kind of go back and forth, and then ultimately the IRB accepts the final version of this. Now at that point, the stamp will still look like this because the IRB has not reviewed the REDCap survey. So you'll send them this survey for review, and if they say, okay, this is good, it matches the other document exactly, they will approve your project, and at that point, you will then get the actual information here for the stamp. You will not resubmit for review for the IRB after that. It is up to you to come in to this field afterwards and make sure it matches exactly what is on the approved IRB stamp. So there's a message here that says you will enter the IRB number and dates after the IRB has approved the project. And please ensure this information is correct, because if you enter a wrong date or something on here, a wrong IRB number, that is considered non-compliant. So you have to make sure that this is correct after the IRB has approved it. So get as many eyes on it as you need to before you actually consent patients to make sure that what goes in here matches what is on the approved stamp here. Okay. Hopefully that makes sense. If it doesn't right now, I am sure that it will when you go through this process with the MyIRB application system. And so now we'll just go through and modify a couple of these fields to make this look more like a consent survey. So this first field is optional. You can give the participant the option to actually download a document or download the consent as it looks, like this. So if they'd rather download it, read it like this, or print it, they can have that option. So let me show you how to set this up. I'm going to click this edit button. And a couple steps here. So this is a descriptive text with optional image, video, audio file attachment. So over here is where I can add a file for the participant to download. So I'm going to go ahead and select this. I'll say choose file. And then I'll find the PD or the document that I want to upload. I actually switched mine to a consent form, so there was less chance that they could make any modifications or anything. So I just went ahead and I have the same document I've been showing you saved as a consent or as a PDF. So I'm going to put that in there. I'm going to upload file, close this, and you'll see my document name here. I'll then go ahead and delete this extra text and then save. Okay, I'm just gonna pretend here that I've gotten my approval, a little out of order because I haven't even done anything here yet, but just let's say I'm going in here and I'm updating this. So here I would just enter my IRB number. I'll just enter a fake one. And then I would replace this with actual dates. We'll say the approval date is today. And the release date is also today. And we'll say the expiration is 1 year from today. And then again, I'll delete the instructional text. Just kind of a random point here. If the cursor is down below, like if my cursor was way down here when I save this, this field will look bigger. So I always have a thing where I like to delete up to the last text. Okay, so there I have my IRB stamp information. Here we have a version number with a date, and I'm just going to say the same date. Again, this will be entered after you get that final approval. There's some information here that I'll go over much more once we release the modification SOP. If you are making a modification before that SOP comes out, please feel free to email me. So delete our instructional text, and I'll say save. Okay, this field is a begin new section field. So if you're not familiar with REDCap, there is an option, or earlier in the survey settings, we said that this survey would appear on multiple pages. And these begin new section fields, this is what breaks up into separate pages. So if I sent out this survey right now as it is, the first page would just be this field. Then I would click next, and then I would go and I would see just these 3 fields. And then the next page would be everything down until the next section field, begin new section field. And so if I look at my document that I'm creating, I think I would want to have this whole first page here on one page of my survey. So I'm going to add some fields above this, or I would just delete this out and start working down here. Before I add some more fields, let me just scroll down and show these other fields down here. They just have more instructions about what needs to be included for specific types of fields, which we will go through in just a moment. Okay, I'm going to add a field, and for today's purposes, because I don't want to spend time just typing in text, I'm going to skip this, and I'm going to create these two fields. So I'll do a purpose of a study and what will happen during the study. And actually, maybe I'll just combine those. And so I'll say purpose and happen. I'll just give it a variable name, whatever makes sense for you. I'll just give it that. And then I like to use this rich text editor when I'm entering information into this. And I will say I'm planning to do a full webinar where we go through designing just this survey. So today I'm only going to do parts of it. And so I'm just going to copy and paste the first line. So here I've got, what is the purpose of this study? And when I paste, I'm going to paste line by line into REDCap for this type of field. The reason being that if you paste several lines or bullets, separated lines, separated bullets in REDCap, it does funny things. So I just I'm doing line by line since these are separated. If we had a full paragraph, you might be able to just copy and paste the whole thing and not have any issues. Here I'm going to paste in a bullet, and you'll see, oh, actually it worked. It pasted as a bullet. A lot of times it doesn't recognize the bullet and just puts it right over here. So here I've got my, what would serve as this portion here. I kind of like to have the contrast in mind, so I'm going to make that not bold, this not bold, and I'm going to go ahead and save this. Oh, and then I would say, whoa, that's some big headings there. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to edit that, and I'm going to change this to paragraph. I'm going to highlight this, change to paragraph. Now I'll save. Okay, so I like the looks of that a little better, but the wording, you know, that's the main thing here, is get that set up. Up here, I'm going to go ahead and insert my project title and principal investigator information. So enter this information here. And open this. I'm going to delete out this text. I'm going to not have this italicized, and I'm going to say REDCap consent demo. And then we had Lasso. We'll go ahead and we'll just enter all this information. And we're going with all 5s for phone number. And get rid of the italicized, and actually on my actual form, this is bolded, so I'm going to go ahead and change that. One random REDCap thing here that I'll point out is in this rich text editor where you have these options above, the default is actually bold. So anytime you're typing anything, it starts as bolded, and if you unbold it, the B is actually becomes highlighted. So it's actually backwards from what you're used to. It starts as bold, and then when you click that, you unbold it. I'll go ahead and save this. And so here we have the majority of the first page. I'm going to skip this section, but just to show you, we have the majority of the first page of our consent document. And quickly, I'm just going to go see if there's any questions that haven't been answered. And so there was a question about DocuSign versus REDCap. I'd say we're still learning about both and what the best situation for both is. What I would say is that if you are planning to use REDCap for anything else in your project, and maybe this was already addressed in the responses, but I'll just say it so everybody hears it. If you're collecting data using REDCap for your project, then it's recommended that you go ahead and use REDCap for your e-consent instead of DocuSign. If you're just using e-consent and you're not collecting any other data in REDCap, then choose whichever one works best for your study. All right, now I'm going to go into this section header here and go ahead and delete out all this text. Oh. Okay. And then this field here is just telling you to do something that I already mentioned, which is for formatting purposes. Unless you know HTML coding, which you certainly can use, and I actually have a link up here in this field where if I click it, it's going to take me to basic using HTML and SCSS formatting in REDCap. So you can actually go there and use HTML if you know how to use that to format. If you do not, I strongly recommend just always check this, use the rich text editor button, and you can format using that. For today, I'm just going to delete this. Okay. Now this field is providing instructions for response fields. And what I mean by response fields, I'll just switch back over to my actual form. And we actually have, somebody doing initials here. And I'm going to go through pretty quickly here based on the time. We're running really short of time, so I'm going to start going a little faster. The main thing here is this is saying that anything that requires a participant response should have this read-only form action tag. So let me just go ahead. I'm going to use this field, but I'm going to delete out all this instructional text. And I'm going to remove this picture that's included in it. And then I'm just going to copy and paste some information here from this. So I'm going to go take this one, paste that in. And then this I'm going to take all together. And for the sake of time, say, okay, that's what we need in there. And I'm going to go ahead and save. The next field says, please answer questions below and place your initials in the field. And then put your actual question here in this yes, no field. I'm just going to copy and paste my yes, no into here. May data be stored and used for future research as described above. I'll just delete this and replace it with what I just copied and pasted. So here, this read-only form action tag is what keeps people from, keep the study team from, editing this after it's been completed by the participant. So anything that requires a participant response, just make sure that is there. Okay, and then what we'll see here is you've got a yes or no, and then you've got an initial field, one that will only appear if the person says yes. That's what my branching logic here is saying, and one that will only appear if I say no. Okay. So I'm not going to do any more editing on this, but just bring over one that I already have completed. So this is what I did earlier. Just to give you, so here's the second yes, no that I ask. And then I have my other text, just to give you an idea of what this should feel like. And I have these section headers in here anytime I want to switch to another page. I want to break this up a little bit. Okay. So that's what it would look like if I went through and added all the text from my form. Okay. And then we get down here to these statement by person agreeing to the study. And then the next 3 fields after that are all things that will be completed by the participant. So in each one of these, just if I open, it always has this read-only form. And then here in the date of consent, it has read-only and it has this at now, which basically that's going to automatically input the time that the person came to this page to sign, so they don't accidentally enter the wrong date. Okay. Then after that, everything here is what's completed by a study team member. And here, this should have the action tag of @hidden_survey, because this will not show up. These fields will not show up when the participant opens this as a survey. So they're not going to see the fields where the study team member completes. This final field is actually some instructions for the person going in to sign the form after the participant has signed the form. So this actually has two action tags. It has hidden survey so that the participant doesn't see it when it's opened as a survey. And then it has this @hidden PDF. And what that does is it makes it so that this field will not show up on the fully executed consent form that the participant receives after the after the consent process is completed. I'm going to go ahead and save this. I see some questions coming in, and I see some of them being answered. I will go back through and review the questions afterwards. But based on time, I'm going to kind of pick up the pace a little bit here, and so feel free to keep answering your questions. They may just come, I may just respond to them after the session and provide those responses to you in a follow-up email. Okay. So we're just going to say we have our entire consent survey completed here, even though we just went through kind of some of the highlights of it. We're going to go to return to list of instruments. Okay, then we're going to go through each of these. So this participant information will open first. And this participant ID, this will always be the first field on the first instrument of any REDCap project. So that's just built in. You can change it to record ID or something like that if you want to, but this will have to stay at the top. This field is just basically saying if you want to modify this to be a screening instrument, you certainly can. But for today, I don't need this field, so I'm just going to delete it. Just have some general information about the participant. And then here, if you wanted to make this a screening instrument, you would just make it match your screening instrument. So after this, you might have, have you been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes? Do you have this condition? Do you have that? Whatever you need to put in here, you can add this. You can add here. And then under here is survey information. So first, there's a field, how would the participant like to complete the e-consent? You can fill this in. And then here is the PIN. So I saw some questions coming in about the participant PIN and how it is set. And it's this field. It's this field right here on this information, on this participant information form. And this is where, as I mentioned, you're going to be having a conversation with the participant at some point. This isn't just an e-consent isn't something you can just send out to a bunch of people and have them consent themselves. You'll be having a conversation with them probably before and during the consent process. And so you can either provide them a PIN or you can allow them to give you a PIN and then you enter it into here. But when we go to test this, we'll have to enter a value into here. Otherwise, there will be no PIN. Okay. And then would you like a copy of the signed consent form emailed to you? This is the field I mentioned in the automated survey invitation that the person has to say yes to this in order to get the fully executed consent form delivered to them. If they say no, that automated survey invitation will not be delivered to them. Go ahead and edit this. I'll delete out the instructional text. And then participants' email address, going way back to when we were first checking the settings, this is the field that's used for email communications. Okay, so when you deliver the survey links, this is the one that uses, this email will be used here. Again, I'm just going to delete out the instructional text. And then this is if you want to enter the email address of the study team member completing the consent process. There's some instructional text here that this is actually tied into an optional alert and notification that you can use for your study team. So I'm going to go ahead and just delete this, just so we get all this instructional text out of here. Okay. I'm going to go back to the list of instruments. And to go back to what I mentioned to you earlier about the questions, what I'll do is I'll just go ahead and go through and finish this, which will probably take us right up to time. And then I'll stay on to answer questions for any of you who are available to stay on and have those questions answered. Otherwise, I'll send out a follow-up email with the answers. Okay, the other two instruments here, you have this consent documentation instrument. And so this is where you can document your consent conversation in the actual consent process. This form was adapted from a document created by the HRQA program to be able to document everything that was said during the consent. Okay, so there's just some basic questions here. The consent was reviewed in its entirety and major points were enforced, yes. Purpose requirements were reviewed, yes. I'm gonna skip down here. You have a notes box where you summarize the consent conversation, say what were the answerable items, did they agree to having their data shared, things like that, whatever answerable yes, no, or initial questions you have, you can outline here. If somebody said, no, I don't want my data saved or shared with other people, you can put that here. These are quality assurance steps that will be very valuable to you, just for your purposes for your study, but also if you get audited. Did the participant agree? And then just the person who did the consent process saying, yes, I did all this, and I am basically saying that everything that's entered up here is true and accurate. Not going to make any modifications today to that, but you can, tailor that to your specific project. Okay, fully executed consent forms. So this is what the people will get. This is what the participant will get, where they can go and download the fully executed consent. And what this is this is the field where the copy of the completed consent is automatically going to be uploaded after it's completed by the study team member. So once that study team member goes in and signs the consent form and saves it in a specific way, it's going to be automatically uploaded to this field. And then this is instructional for the study team. It's at Hidden Survey, so the participant will not see it, but it just provides a little bit of additional instruction about this form. So not much needs to be done with these last two unless you want to. One thing I did that I'm not going to change, but here there's a spot where you can enter name and phone number and email for a study team member for the participant to contact. Okay, now we have to go into user rights. So I'm going to go ahead and go to user rights. And I'm going to check my own user rights. I'm going to click on my name and I'm going to say edit user privileges. And in the SOP, it tells you what the minimum rights you need to have in order to consent someone. So you need to at least be able to create a record. You need to be able to view and edit all these forms. And you need to say edit survey response here on the informed consent survey. Once you have that, make sure you've given yourself this right. Otherwise, you won't be able to complete the process. Save changes. And then the next step of the SOP is to add in all your other users, all other study team members on your project. Okay. Quickly, I'm going to show an alert and notification that's built in. Right now, it's not there, but if you click Show Deactivated Alert, so when you create this project from a template, it has this alert deactivated. This is optional. This is something you can send to your study team after a participant has completed the actual consent survey. So if I go enable alert, actually it goes away, so I have to say uncheck this, show deactivated alerts. If I go into edit, basically all this up here is saying that this will be triggered when the participant submits their consent survey. And then it's going to deliver to the WUSTL email address of the study team member completing it. You can also manually enter other study team members here if you have additional people who can complete the consent process. And then in the body of this consent, it has a link where you can open directly to the participant's completed consent form to sign. The reason it's optional is because you will most likely already be logged into REDCap while you're consenting a participant. Go ahead and save that. Okay, so now we are ready to test this. And so what I'm going to do is go to Add Edit Records, and I'm just going to add a new record. I'll go into participant information, and I'll just enter some information for a participant. I'll say it's me. I'll just pick a random date for a birthday. I'll say participant said it's good to send survey by email. Enter a numeric PIN. So here I'll choose a PIN. It's probably not one I should choose in the real world. I'm kind of doing the opposite, 9876 instead of 1234, but just something easy to remember for our purposes. Would you like a signed copy of the consent form emailed to you? I'll say yes. And then participant's email. I'm going to enter my email for that, as well as for the study team member. Now, this could be when I'm first calling a person from that I've received their name from Volunteers for Health, or maybe the person called into me because they saw my name on a flyer, and I'm filling this form out before we get to the actual consent form. I'll go ahead and say complete, and then save and exit form. Okay. The next thing I'll do is go to Survey Distribution Tools. I should see whatever email address I entered into the participant email field, and then I'll say Compose Invitation. Okay, so here, this one never has the default text included in it. So in the SOP, I'll just scroll down. Quite a ways here. So here we're at the portion where we're testing the e-consent survey. And rather than enter this in, just for the sake of time, basically this is the portion here, and it has what you should type in to the subject line and the email body. Okay. For our sake today, I'm not going to do that. Also say if you copy and paste it, it gets a little weird. You can try it. Maybe, yeah, I'm not going to try it right now, but we'll say, and we'll just pretend I entered everything correct here from the SOP, and I'm just going to go ahead and I'll put this in. I'm going to say consent to sign. Again, this isn't what I would put this, I would put somebody else, a different name here, but just for today, I'll go ahead and do this. So I just sent my invitation to my participant. So now hopefully here in just a second, there we go. So I got my consent to sign as my participant. So I'm now wearing my participant hat. And I'm going to open my survey. Okay, so the first thing is it's going to ask me to enter a PIN. And I'm going to show the value here. And let's just say I enter it incorrectly and then I go to log in. I get this error message that we checked early on. And then if I come back and I enter it correctly, it should let me log in. Okay, so now we have that first field where I have the option that I can download this. Again, I'm the participant here. I say, oh, okay, I can download it and I can look at it. You know, I've been in studies before. This is more like what I'm used to, so I'll read through that. So the participant has that option. And we'll go next page. So I just saw somebody, how did the participant get the PIN? Again, that's up to you whether you want to supply them the PIN or whether they supply it to you and then you enter it into that participant PIN field. Okay, so now I'm just reading through, and now if I'm a study team member, I'm engaging with the participant at this point, and I'm there either by phone or Zoom or however to be able to answer their questions as they go through this. So here we have the section where I ask a question, so I can say yes, enter my initials. Just to show you, if I switch over to no, it deletes it because we had separate fields for both yes and no. Now if I switch back, I've got to re-enter my initials. So there's never a situation where someone would enter no, but have initials on the yes field. All right, very short consent form that we made today. Participant goes ahead, agrees. Add signature. I'm just going to do not a very good signature, but it'll work for today. And I'll say next page. Okay, now this is a built-in feature of REDCap where the participant is prompted after they sign to go through, check to make sure everything's there. And you'll notice at this point, they only have the participant signature. I'm going to go ahead and say, I certify that all the information is correct, and submit. And then here's our the message, the thank you message that we had in the survey settings. Let me go ahead and close this. If I go to my email, you'll see I got this alert and notification telling me that a participant completed the consent survey. So that's what we just set up a moment ago. But since I'm already logged into REDCap, what I'm going to do is go to the record status dashboard. And I should see that I have a completed participant information, completed consent form, and then an incomplete fully executed consent. The reason this shows up is that, I'll go in here, this form already got uploaded to it, but it hasn't been delivered yet because I have not signed the form yet. Another thing that I forgot to do, just kind of going quickly to finish here without too much overtime, is as a study team member, I would have opened this consent documentation and just gone through and filled this out, said yes, yes, filled everything out, gave my summary of the consent conversation, and then signed that everything was good. We'll skip that for right now. So the next step is to go in and sign this as the study team member. We'll go ahead, I'll open, and then I have this option to edit the responses because I gave myself that right. Go ahead and edit response. And as I scroll down, what you can see is even though I've selected to edit responses, I cannot edit anything that the participant filled out. But if I go down here to the statement of person who obtained consent, I do have the ability to edit that. So then I would say agree. I would sign. Maybe I'll give my middle initial here just so we have some distinguishing between participant and study team member. And I'll just do initials here as well. And then as a study team member, I actually have to enter this now. And the reason is because then it shows that I signed after the participant. So participant signed it at 1:34, I signed at 1:37. Now these instructions here are important because this is what you have to follow these to deliver the fully executed consent. So the first thing I'm going to do after I've completed this is I'm going to save and stay. So if I click this little caret here, I'll do save and stay. And then I'm going to scroll back down. And one more time, I'm going to do, as opposed to save and stay, this time I'm going to say save and mark as complete. Once I do save and mark survey as complete, and I've filled in all these, that is what triggers the delivery of the fully executed consent. So now if I go to my email, there we go. So let me delete this one out because this is that's the one that went to the lab team. So now I initially got my email to sign the consent form, and now I've got the one for the completed consents. And so now I'm going to open this. It uses the same PIN, but there is a little catch in that if you've logged into a survey, if your participant is logged into the survey within 30 minutes, it will not require them to enter their PIN again. If it's been 30 minutes since I entered my PIN last time, it will require me. So let me just go ahead and click on this. And it didn't require a PIN. Now look up here, it says survey login is still active. So if the person comes back at another time to get this form, they will have to enter the PIN. But if it's within 30 minutes, it just kind of assumes the same session. And then here, the participant is able to download the completed consent form. This time, if I open, I'll go to the bottom, and I see I've got a participant signature up here and my study team member signature down here. Now, as a participant, I can click out of here, or I can even click submit, close out, and then if a week later I'm like, oh, I don't know what I did with my consent for that study, I can actually come back here and open this at any time. And if it was after 30 minutes, I would have to enter my PIN. I can download that. All right. That is how to go through, set up, and test this information. And just to show, if I went through here, let's just say fill this out. I won't go through all of this. But let's just say I completed everything and then I hit I'm going to get a warning because I didn't complete some stuff that's required. I'm just going to ignore that and leave the record. If I go back to my record status dashboard, you can see I have got a really nice record here where I have the participant record. I have their information and potentially screening survey, or not survey, screening form here. I have their completed consent form or completed consent survey here. I have the consent documentation form here. And then I have the fully executed consent form stored right here within this person's record. So if I go back to participant identification, there we go. I have all that relevant documentation of the consent process in the participant's record. And then we had questions about, whether you can have this as an actual project or just a consent project. You can imagine if you were collecting more data, you'd have more instruments down here. Okay, so there's still have 50 people on the call, so I'm going to go and see if there's go back and see the questions. Feel free to stay on As long as you'd like, I will be here until 2 answering these questions. So what if you're consenting them in person, but using eConsent? Are there best practices for that since you are logged into REDCap yourself? So what I would do, there's a couple options. Like, you could deliver it to their email as done there, but that would not be very efficient. I would do add edit record. When you add the new record, so let's say you've gone through and I'm just going to put like one thing here. I'll say yes, save and exit. Or if I then go to this informed consent survey, what I can do is up here on survey options, as long as I've saved this record, as long as I've saved something in the form, the survey options button will be here. And there's this option to log out plus open survey. I'm not going to do that because I don't want to log out of REDCap. Just to show you, if I do open survey, it opens the survey on a new tab. If I had selected open and log out, it would have logged me out. So then at that point, you could hand the participant the tablet. You're logged out of REDCap, but they have the survey open. They would just enter their PIN and they would go from there. For IRB purposes, do I need to print a paper copy of the consent for my records, or by having a copy in REDCap, will that suffice for IRB? That should suffice. Yep, should be set for that. Is the reporting function useful for the e-consents? So creating a report, I would say one area where I think creating a report would be very useful is if you have these yes/no questions. You can just go in, you could quickly see, you would get 2 different rows. Let me just export reports and stats without saving. If I just look at all data here, so you could have a, you could look at this, you could export, would you like a, oops, let me scroll over here. I did everything, but if you went to the actual consent survey portion here, I don't know where all my yes, no's went to. Oh, I think I went too far. But anyway, you could just quickly see which people said yes to like data sharing or those sorts of things. It should be in here somewhere. There we go. So you'd have this form and you could quickly see, okay, participant 1 said yes, and they initialed in the yes. Participant 2, we'll just pretend that they said no, and then their initials would be over here. So you could just quickly output to see, which people said yes and no to each of the responses and things like that. But I don't see you'd be exporting, like the signatures very often. I think what's more important here would be that, as you're building up your records, you would have all these stored, fully executed consent forms here in this form. If the participant forgets their PIN, is it appropriate to email them their own PIN with a secure email? I would say no. I wouldn't email it to them because, I would highly recommend doing that by phone if possible. If that's not possible, then I would run that by the IRB if the secure email is enough. I would get very nervous about having their PIN, even with the secure feature, and I don't know all the ins and outs of the secure feature, but it just to have the PIN in there, yeah, so that would just be, I would check that with the IRB. I would primarily go for a phone call, and actually, going back to the designer here in our survey login, you can put your phone number to call here in this message that they'll get if they enter the wrong PIN. as they're trying to log in. Just scrolling up to see if there's other questions. Okay, I think I already talked about this. Can we add this survey to an already approved consent? Yes, there's some nuances. It actually might be easier to just kind of build in some of the settings from this around what you already have, as opposed to creating a template project. So I would reach out to me directly. Feel free to reach out to me directly with that. There's some questions about the secure, but it looks like those are mainly answered. Okay, if you have a demographic survey as approved IRB document as part of your consent process, can they be connected to REDCap? Yeah. You know, and that could be, you know, depending on what that is. So if you get that information after they're consented, then I would put that, you know, that might be the first one I put. You know, if I was building this out, my first step in my project here, I get my consent down, and then I might build in my additional surveys or instruments here. So you could have demographics, you know, whatever comes next. Survey, I'll just give it the most generic name possible, but then you've got some sort of survey that they're going to complete, and then you can just build your instruments down here as you would in a REDCap project. And if you've never used REDCap, you know, you kind of build this these instruments. Almost you could picture it almost like a paper folder where you have, you know, maybe your consent form on top, consent documentation. You wouldn't have this, but then you have all the surveys they complete after they get you know, submitted in that, or after they get consented in that folder. And you could do the same thing here. You could build out as many of those surveys in REDCap as you want, as long as the IRB knows that you are collecting that information using REDCap. Yeah, so Jennifer, yes. So essentially the e-consent can be part of the overall study database. Yep, it can. Let's see, another question. I work with a repository that can modify the protocol according to new research trends. Besides the early renewal, how easy is it to modify the consent? It would not happen very often. It's the main thing with modifying the consent is that you don't want to go in and just modify this document. What you do is actually create a copy of it. And it's down here. And so as soon as I knew I was submitting a modification to my project, I would create this copy of the project and I would start modifying this. And this is what I would use to submit to the IRB for approval of the modification. Once that's done, and the IRB says, okay, new version's good, you would go in, you would update your stamp, and then you would go to this one, and there's survey settings here, and you can offline, you can make this one not active. Do that. So now, you know, now there's no chance that my participant would fill out a form that is no longer the most up-to-date consent form. I'm not going to do that right now, but that's the biggest thing, is to make sure you have a separate, you know, you're not just modifying this. definitely feel free to email me direct questions directly. Thanks, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and end the meeting.